Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you're broke. This is day 2 on a 30-day video challenge for the Get Set Up Club for coaches. If you want to get on the waiting list for the next round, email me at support@crystaljoycrawford.com and you can do that. We are going live every single day, diving into the topics that I think are coming up as we get set up, and also the topics that for me are really relevant to looking at whether or not you really want to jump into creating a business for yourself, a coaching business for yourself, working with other people. And I thought today, I titled this, Why Am I Broke? Because I was on Facebook today and I ran into this creator named Tyler Ward. And if you guys haven't checked him out, highly recommend. He is a songwriter, he's a producer, he's an entrepreneur, he's a content creator. And his video was called This Is Why You're Broke. And I was like, I'm going to steal that idea like an artist, because what he talked about was the thing that those of us who create out in the world are constantly facing, which is this good enough to be out in the world? One of the things he talked about that I just thought was so brilliant, he's like, nobody's thinking about you. Nobody cares about you. Nobody, if you do a bad video, you write a bad song, nobody cares. They are consuming so much content that if it's terrible, they don't care. And, you know, I was really grateful to watch that, because one of the things that's really got my attention these days, as I'm like finding my footing and kind of building my way forward again for the 82nd time, is that the well that is my creator was kind of dry. And so I'm doing a lot of filling that well. And when, I don't know about you, but when I'm in a well-filling time, I don't necessarily have a lot to say, right? There's not a lot of output. And it was helpful for me to hear what he was saying, because like I said yesterday, it kind of, even when you don't feel like it, or when you don't think there's a lot of great stuff coming out of you, even if it's terrible, it's going to be better than nothing coming out of you. So I thought I'd bring in one of the books that I'm doing a lot of reading. I'm reading a lot of books right now. And one of the ones I'm reading is called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And this is not so much in the genre of like feeding the creative well as it is giving me words for what it is that I've been choosing. This is actually, I'm taking you all the way to the end of the book from the conclusion. Hi guys. But here's what he says in the conclusion at the very beginning. He goes, it's a quote by Dr. James Hollis, and it goes like this. In the end, we will only be transformed when we can recognize and accept the fact that there is a will within each of us, quite outside the range of conscious control. A will which knows what is right for us, which is repeatedly reporting to us via our bodies, our emotions, our dreams, and is incessantly encouraging our healing and wholeness. And I would add to this, is incessantly encouraging us to get our voice out in the world. Do you ever feel like what it is you're doing with your life isn't quite it, or isn't quite enough? Do you ever get that itchy sense of dissatisfaction? That is the inside of you going, what the ever-loving F with the outside of us? This is not matching what it is that I am, and what it is that's showing up on the outside of the world is not, there's not a congruence there. It's like, we're not doing the thing. Well, what's the thing, you might ask yourself? Well, I don't know exactly what the thing is, but I know it's not this. And so as creators of different realities, it's up to us to go, am I going to just start creating stuff and putting stuff out there and getting that information? Or am I going to sit back and live live within the boundaries of anger and fear. And let me tell you where I got that. This is also in the conclusion here. According to Dr. Hawkins' research, so now we've moved on into Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote the book Power versus Force, created what he calls the map of consciousness. This is pretty interesting. And according to Dr. Hawkins' research, over 80% of the global population operate between 100 and 150. I'll tell you what that means in terms of their individual level of consciousness and emotional development. So what that means is that 80% of the global population operates between fear and anger in terms of their individual level of consciousness and emotional development. And most people only grow by 5 points in that range. So in between anger and fear, most people only grow about 5 points in their entire lifetime. Most people never make it beyond being driven by fear or anger. So that angst that you're not creating your life in the way that you wanted to, and the fear of creating your life, most people stay right there. Even still, there are some people who grow hundreds of points up this scale, even in a relatively short period of time. So it's available to everyone, though few choose it. It takes commitment and courage to begin transforming your life. All progress starts by telling the truth. Once you make commitment and courage towards big dreams, 10x dreams, you can and you will evolve to the higher dimensions on Hawkins' map. Go to this book, Power versus Force. That's really interesting. Here's the map. The scale of his map goes from 20, which is shame, all the way to 1,000, which is enlightenment. Here, we'll keep it on the screen. 20, which is shame, and 1,000, which is enlightenment. Everything below 200 on the scale, 200 is courage, is operated from a negative emotion, such as guilt, apathy, fear, or anger. The higher emotional energies include acceptance, I would say allowance, love, joy, and peace. So more the elementals. According to Dr. Hawkins, who spent decades developing and studying this map and testing it on millions of people, the average person only advances 5 points up this scale their entire life, right? So you've got up to 200, which is the courage point. Most people stay down here. And then you've got gratitude and allowance and all that, and then enlightenment, whatever that is up here, okay? Now, once you make a commitment and courage towards big dreams, you can and you will evolve to the higher dimensions on Hawkins' maps. You can reach a place of allowance, caring, gratitude, and even enlightenment. And you do this by stripping more and more layers of the David away. The David is in reference to the statue by Michelangelo. And if you guys haven't read this 10X is Easier Than 2X book, he tells this big story in the introduction about the arc of Michelangelo, the sculptor, and how where he started, and then the 10X leaps that he made to get to where he got to. And his 10X leaps involved things that could have gotten him killed, actually. Back in the day, he realized as a sculptor that to sculpt the kind of detail that he wanted to have in the things that he was creating, he had to understand human anatomy. And at that time, to study human anatomy meant you were dissecting cadavers. And at that time, that was illegal and punishable by death. And so anyway, he found his way. And he ended up dissecting and studying more human cadavers than anybody in the history of the world has ever studied, and went on to become the greatest sculptor that the world has ever seen because he had such a working knowledge of the anatomy of the human body. Like, he up-leveled himself to be a category of one. Has never been anybody else like him because of his willingness to grow his capacity and go take the courage point and go, fuck that, I'm going way beyond what anybody says is possible. So, you do this by stripping more and more layers of the David away. As you develop your unique ability to unfathomable levels, and I'm going to be doing a workshop soon that's going to take us into a book study of a book called Unique Ability, and you consciously power in your life. You will stop operating out of brute force emotions or energy. You'll stop forcing yourself to do anything you don't want to do. You'll live by what psychologists call pull motivation rather than push motivation, where you're pulled by what you want and what excites you. That's freedom and intrinsic motivation. When you're pulled by what is exciting to you, that's intrinsic motivation. You're no longer operating based on need, but on want. You're free. So let me read some of your comments here, and then I'll get into sort of wrapping this up. This is so great. I needed this today. I'm so glad. Greg said, when my outside reality doesn't match my desires, it's because I don't believe in them enough on the inside to match who I believe I am. Yeah, I wonder if it's belief, or I wonder if it's this other thing where you're actually choosing big enough. That's what I really got in reading this book, this 10x is easier than 2x, is when you start to look at it, when you start to really look at, do I just want more of the same, or do I want this to be 10 times greater than it is? If I were actually going to 10x my life, not double it, what would change? And when you start to do that, this is what I'm starting to recognize about this process, because I've been applying this question in the last couple of days and I'm seeing really different results. You get different information. You ask a different question, you get different information. How many of you guys have been asking yourself, what's it going to take to 10x my life? You can start to ask that. When you do that, you don't need belief anymore. Belief falls away as a motivator, because you don't need to put any effort into it. You are now being pulled towards what excites you rather than trying to push into place what you think you should have almost. And you no longer need to exert extra energy because you are inspired forward. You are now like, finally, enough space for me to get creative in a way that really works for me. Instead of trying to go, what would it take for my business to double? What would it take for my income to double? What if I were going to 10 times the amount of income? What would I need to look at that's different? What would fall away? What would I no longer spend my time on? What would I start to spend my time on? And then your brain and your being don't know the difference between this thing to get creative about or this thing to get creative about. It's just willing to get creative. So when you start to introduce a different kind of question, then you get creative in a different way. And I love that. It's like you don't really have to try any harder. You just have to introduce different inputs. When you input different thing, then you get different awareness. You get different energy. So what if you started asking a different question, something that's actually big enough for you, interesting enough for you, where you're like, oh, if I were going to 10x my income, not from like having to figure it out or having to once you get into 10x, you can't like 10 times your effort. You have to then look at something else. You have to go different. You're like, what would that even be like? It wouldn't even be the same life, right? You probably wouldn't be doing the same job. You wouldn't be, charging the same rates. You wouldn't be doing the same kind of classes, right? Things would change. So the need for belief drops away when you start to ask a big enough question. What was the book you said with the scale of enlightenment? That book is called Power versus Force. I'm actually going to put together a book list for you guys that just swap you for your email address. I will do that on the next video that I do. I have a list of books that I've been reading that I've been wanting to get to you guys, and I'm going to put that together today, and I'll get a link for you tomorrow. But that book's called Power versus Force. Great talk. Thank you. You're so welcome. You mean being that already and not just wanting despite current circumstances. Well, being trumps wanting. So when you start to ask a different question, you are being something different innately. Just when you start to go, because innately, when curiosity takes over, curiosity is the choice you make that causes all other false motivators to fall away. Curiosity is the leader of energies. So once you start getting curious, that trumps everything else. And it also is the activator for the universe to go, oh, you're curious about this, I will contribute. And your brain. So everything starts to work together in symphony to support what it is that you're looking for. Because curiosity is that search for the wondering of the thing that pulls everything to you. And I'm really, really getting, as I move forward in this journey and, add other inputs and things that I'm starting to get things that I never got before. Sorry, that had a better, that was going somewhere and then it expanded out of my head. So let's do this instead. Let's kind of wrap this up today. And let me ask you, what would it take for you to start asking a bigger question? And if you want to, just steal the one from this, right? Like if I were going to 10 times this, what would I be aware of and what would I choose? The cool thing about a true question is it doesn't have an answer. Actually, if a question has an answer, it's not a question. So you can start to ask it and you don't need to work at receiving the information. I've been when I start to play with a new question, I kind of apply it to everything. I was getting up this morning, and those of you guys that are on my email list know that up to this moment, I've pretty much been emailing every single day for quite some time. The last 2 days I haven't. Why? Because I applied the question, if I were going to 10 times this, would I choose this or something else? So I'm allowing the question to sort of work its way into my entire ecosystem. So I'll ask it for everything. And now I'm really looking at, like, if we were 10 times growth, if we were creating 10 times in the business, what would the business be like? That's a question that's just rumbling around in my world. And that's how to use it. You let it kind of rumble around. There's some sort of science fiction something that has these rumbling elements. Just picture like a rumbling rock that's sort of just rumbling around in your world, just gently like terraforming your world in a different way. That's what questions do, okay? Maybe if you want, put legs on that rock. I don't know. So I would like to leave you with that. Like, what would it take to ask yourself that? The other thing is, like, if you were, is there an ache inside of you to be contributing in the world in a different way? And if you were to say yes to it, would it change your life? And my invitation to you today is to really sit with, what would it take to be willing? Because this thing of that there's 80% of all people, 80% of you watching this will never go beyond the 200 on the scale from 0 to 1,000, right? 80% of you are going to stay within anger and fear. But there's 20% of you that have a willingness and an ability to go beyond that, even quite quickly. And if that's you, what would it take? And where could you start? Nobody cares about you. Your content or whatever it is you create out in the world is going to be watched for seconds if it's bad and longer if it's good. And you'll have another chance in the next minute to do something else. And at the end of the day, it's not really about other people. It's about you living as you. And so if you living as you is what's happening now in your life, carry on. If you are feeling away, stifled, stuck, depressed, all the, the below 200 scale of negative emotions, you're living there in the angst energies, then you have a different choice available that you're not choosing yet. And That's the thing to go after. What choice do I have that I haven't chosen yet? If I were going to 10 times my life, what would that be like? And with that, I will bid you adieu until tomorrow. If you got anything out of this, share this with a friend. I'm here for you. I'm here for us. See you tomorrow.